Hello. Welcome to today's webcast brought to you by Power Grid International and Electric Light and Power magazines. Today's event, Connecting the Physical and Digital Domains, Intelligent Integration for a Smart City, is being sponsored by Lidos Engineering. My name is Teresa Hansen. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Power Grid International and Electric Light and Power magazines, and I'll be moderating today's webcast. So before we begin, I need to cover a few housekeeping items with you. At the bottom of your audience console, there are multiple application widgets for you to use. Most of them are pretty self-explanatory, but I do want to point out the question and answer tab. If you have any questions for our speakers during the webcast, you can click on the Q&A widget, and you can go ahead and submit your question. Our speakers are going to answer the questions once they've completed their presentation, but you can type your question in at any time during the webcast, so you don't have to wait until they're finished before you can go ahead and enter your question in. Also, you can expand the slide area by clicking on the maximize icon that's at the top right of the slide area, or you can drag from the bottom right corner to enlarge the screen. And actually, you can expand and reposition many of the components that are on your screen, so feel free to kind of play around with it and do that and adjust it any way you need to give you the best viewing experience. If you have any technical difficulty during the webcast, you'll see at the bottom there is a help widget. If you'll click on that, it has a question mark icon on it. It will address the most common technical issues that people face. But if after looking at that you still need assistance, use the Q&A widget and type your question or issue into that Q&A widget, and a member of our webcast support team will work with you to correct the problem. And also, I want to remind you that for your convenience, the presentation will be available on demand within 24 hours of this live event. So a reminder email message will be sent to everyone who is registered. It will include a link to the archive. The archive will also be accessible from the magazine's homepage at www.elp.com. So if you want to go back at any time, say you lose your email and you want to go back 2 or 3 months from now to view this webcast, it will be available. It will be available on the magazine website for 1 year. So now it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to today's speakers. We have Steve Schneider, who is the Chief Solutions Architect, and Brandon Freeman, who is a Solutions Architect, both from Lidos Engineering. Steve is tasked with, among other things, leveraging and combining Leidos energy, health, and national security technologies into new business models that meet complex new business requirements. Steve has an extensive background in utility operations, having spent nearly 2 decades with Constellation Energy and Baltimore Gas and Electric. Brandon is a solutions architect for Lidos Engineering, where he oversees the development of water, energy, and smart infrastructure initiatives, leveraging his background in machine-to-machine communication and the Internet of Things technologies. So at this point, I would like to go ahead and turn the program over to Steve.
Great. Thank you, Teresa. So for those who attended either the first webcast or went to the Smart Cities Conference in DC about 2 weeks ago, please bear with us. I'm going to go through about 6 background slides to get everybody on the webcast up to speed, and then after that we'll go into some new content. So, hey, we're all here today learning and interested about smart cities. So today we're going to talk about why do we want to pursue a smart city, and what is a smart city? What are the elements that make up the smart city? How do we create new value by intelligently integrating the physical assets with the digital applications? Brandon's going to take us through a really exciting case study with regards to how transit and the improvement of transit can really lift the smart city up. And then we'll round out by going through a top 10 list of applications that can play into a smart city and just discuss how that can improve the overall aspect of the smart city solution. So, what is Leidos? Leidos, we have 3 areas that we really focus on: national security, health, and engineering. And when you look across what really comprises those 3 sectors, security, health, wellness, power, all the way over to environment and civil infrastructures, and take a step back, you really realize all 6 of those nicely fold into how a smart city solution can come up and how it can improve a city. So we wanted to take those 6 areas that we have expertise in and industry knowledge, and really start talking about how some of those considerations can be used into building up your smart city solution. So why a smart city? So if you really take a step back and look at the 50,000-foot view, there in this century and beyond, there is going to be a migration of the world's population toward urban centers. In fact, the UN predicts that by the end of this century, up to 90% of the world's population will be in urban centers. So with that influx coming in, and we know that cities have finite budget resources, and the infrastructure that actually is already in those cities are aging, cities are going to have to start figuring out how to use more resources, make less waste, and actually be able to get really more out of less. So those drivers, what's driving the big trends? What are also some of the drivers? Well, one is all cities work around economics, and economic development and the influx of jobs are vitally important to a healthy city. So how can a smart city work toward putting the economic development, the jobs, the income in? We also know that one of the new paradigms of how the world's moving toward is sustainability, clean, and a regulatory fashion. How do we achieve sustainability? How can you get thousands and millions of people together and be cleaner and have a higher quality of life? Cities, with the population increases, both what they have and how it's going up, the essential services, cities need to focus on that. How do they ensure that? How is the quality of life of my residents, my merchants, my visitors? What is the community engagement and citizen ownership? If a citizen lives in the city, how can they become a greater ownership and ability to make informed decisions? All that really also boils down to, finally, there is each city has its own individual brand, a reputation, and really a future legacy. We're going to talk about large infrastructures and large movements and evolutions in the smart city. So what we're really doing is we're setting up the legacy for our children's and our children's children, which is really a multi-generational play. So what are some of the components, what really makes up, what are the elements of a smart city, if you will? Well, first of all, I wanted to say the way that we look at a smart city is we look at that as a connected community. That is an informed, engaged lifestyle. The people who live in the city and work, that's the commerce, industry, the education, the tourism, the health, all that is connected together so that there is a sense of ownership and a sense of civic pride. So if that's the end state, what does a smart city need to have to go toward that? The first is it all starts with a vision, and each particular city has its own unique needs, but each of those cities are going to have their own unique vision. That vision will crystallize and really set forth all of the future direction that the smart city solution, the smart city programs, the direction, the laws, all that put the word going toward that connected community. Having that crystal vision is very, very important. Now, if you move up that arrow, you'll notice there's a physical component to a city. There's your utilities, your electric, your gas, there's your sewer, there's your transportation, there's a security component, there's sensors, there's water, waste. All that is the physical infrastructure that really sets up the foundation for a city. Today, all cities have that. In a lot of cities, they're all siloed up and they really don't talk to each other. So the first step of that is how do I take those physical infrastructures, tie them together, get them into a macro system so they all start playing off of each other and do that in an intelligent fashion. Now, in today's world and as we move forward, we know that there's going to be an incredible amount of connectivity. You've heard of the Internet of Things. There's live big data. There's data fusion. There's wearable mobility. There's iPads. All of these systems provide petabytes and terabytes and incredible amounts of information. So the real thing is how do you take that tidal wave of information and be able to intelligently integrate it and tie it together so that then what we're doing is we're taking that intelligent digital integration, merging it with the connected physical, and both of those basically combined with a vision lift the city up into a connected community. which is a very, very exciting place to be. So when you all may be thinking about a smart city solution in your head, what are some of the considerations that as you step back and say, hey, I want to take my city, my community, even my organization into a smart city or a smart construct, what do we look at? Well, the first thing is that there are multiple considerations. Obviously, there's technical. Do you have the technical wherewithal? Is the technology or the computer systems there? That's an important aspect, but it's actually it is a subset of a larger considerations. Economics. Will my vision help me move toward a positive economics? Will it pay for itself? If not, it may be a very significant draw on limited resources. Operational sustainability. How many times have we all been around a program which has started and you look back in 6, 8 months, maybe a year later, and it's kind of going off the face of the earth? Being able to tie operational sustainment, working with your stakeholders, having alignment, understanding how your operations tie into the long-term vision is important. Security, privacy, cybersecurity, we've heard about it, needs to be addressed. The regulatory play. If you can put together your smart city solution so that it fits within existing regulations, you don't need to go back and go to your federal or your state and have changing in tariffs. If you can work within the existing regulatory framework or set your solution so it minimizes that, that really does set up a greater environment for success. And then finally, a consideration that is often overlooked is community outreach. Or change management, it can be called in the commercial arena. How can I have my constituents, my citizens, my businesses tied in so that they are consistently in lockstep with the vision that's going forward? Again, a smart city consists of many components. It's not just simply the technical architecture. So all that put together, and kind of what I wanted to show in this picture is really, this is what I'd look at what the end state of the smart city is. It's grounded on vision and policy. You work up through those considerations, regulatory, technical, operational sustainment. Then you have that layer of physical infrastructure that exists in every city. The art of putting together a good smart city solution is getting those physical solutions together, have them connected into a holistic fashion, and then be able to take the data that comes out of them, run that through an intelligent integration, the digital arena. How do I fuse real-time data? How do I get situational awareness so I can get intelligence and actionable intelligence? How can I use it in a mobility sense, because everybody has pads, wearable devices are coming out much more, so that it's no longer set to a central data center, but it's all over. You take that physical, you take that digital, you merge it together, and that elevates the city up again. So where everyone lives and breathes and does your commerce, your industry, you learn, you heal, you visit, and you have fun and leisure and tourism. That all ties together. Now, I'm going to be handing this over to Brandon in a second, but the interesting thing about that is that physical arena tied with the digital arena makes a nice sense. Brandon is going to be really focusing on he'll be focusing on the transportation aspect of the physical, and then really go through an insightful vignette of examples and thought processes of how that transportation can go up through the intelligent integration and really help lift the city up. So Brandon, my friend, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Steve. So if you're able to join us on our last webinar conversation, Steve really dived into the first two elements that you see here in a smart city, the vision and the intelligent infrastructure, and talked about not only how intelligent infrastructure can improve the efficiency of some of your smart cities projects, but also about the valuable data set, which you just alluded to, that intelligent infrastructure provides. What we're going to focus on today are these last two elements, the intelligent integration element and the connected community element that comes from that, to talk about how to extract this data from your infrastructure and then how to create and deliver meaningful value to the community to really create that two-way conversation both with the public and between employees and different departments within the city. As you go through the conversation on intelligent integration today, there's also this context that Steve alluded to of the blending of the physical and digital. And what this really is about is, we've all heard about the Internet of Things and the deep tie-in that this has to smart cities. by integrating the physical and the digital together, you're able to draw on more efficiencies than just relying on the physical or the intelligent infrastructure, if you will, alone in a smart cities project. And so we're going to be talking about this relationship as we go throughout our conversation today. So in looking at intelligent infrastructure and how it fits into a smart city, it's always first important to look at some of the key challenges that cities are facing as they go about smart cities initiatives, and specifically how intelligent integration can help. And so if you look at three main challenges, one of the first ones is that in a metropolitan area, you have a large territory of widely distributed assets. You can think of intersections, meters for utilities, various different, you've trash cans, bus stops, various different physical assets across your territory that now have the opportunity to be connected. And then you have a wide variety of people distributed all throughout the territory as well with different needs. And so this broad distribution is a key challenge that the cities have to address with any smart cities initiative. And so the second flows naturally from that, which is how do I connect all these assets to all of these people, and how do I do that in a secure fashion so that I'm taking privacy into consideration, I'm taking security into consideration, and how do I do so in a cost-efficient way so that I can keep as much of my legacy infrastructure investment as possible while still making sure that I'm able to anticipate and account for next-generation systems that are coming online. And finally, a third challenge is once I have this data in-house, how can I provide meaningful value and meaningful applications both for citizens and for the multiple departments within a city? And of course, underlying this is always, the concept of there being a limited budget within a city, and how to get the highest return on your investment by leveraging this smart cities architecture. So when you dive down into intelligent integration and look at the actual process itself, there's really three key phases within an intelligent integration framework. And the first is, of course, connecting these assets. So once you have assets generating this valuable data, how do you connect them, secure, and deliver that data back in a most efficient fashion? And here's where we talk about this concept of a shared use smart cities network. There are many departments throughout a city. Each has their own network that may cover a portion of the city's territory and have certain characteristics. How do you bring those networks together to provide a most cost-efficient method of delivering this data? And of course, as we mentioned today, cyber and physical security threats are an issue now, and how do you anticipate and account for those when you're connecting these assets in this first phase? Second phase is once you have the data, how do I interpret and analyze this and create a common data set that departments across the city can share? And we'll talk a little bit about an enterprise service bus and analytics platforms. And finally, once I've created valuable data and valuable applications, how do I take that out to the public and to different employees and departments to make sure that not only they know about the value that's been created, but they're able to use it in their day-to-day lives? And so this may be a different view to articulate that. This is more of a smart cities systems architecture technical point of view, but it effectively illustrates what we just talked about here. If you look at the bottom row, sensors and assets, these are those intelligent infrastructure items that Steve alluded to earlier here with your meters, street lights, et cetera. We talk about having a cybersecurity layer here so that this data is protected. And then the second layer is where intelligent integration begins, and that's this IT communications layer where you're using a hybrid network to cost-effectively bring your data back. Once you have the data in-house, you have smart applications that are able to parse this data, create value for its users, and in the end, we talk about how you take that value and get it out to the community to facilitate those conversations. Now, the technical overview is, of course, very interesting and very important, but it's also important to note that a smart cities project is only successful if you take a holistic approach. And this is what we talk about here in terms of it being, in fact, a smart cities life cycle. So the first phase of any smart cities project is feasibility. And here in the feasibility stage, it's really important to focus on identifying and bringing all the stakeholders together, because any Smart Cities project obviously is going to be going across multiple departments, public-private partnerships, in fact, even. And so it's important to have all the stakeholders together during a feasibility assessment to make sure that everyone's aligned with the value you're providing today and in the future with your Smart Cities project. Now, in the financing phase, the second phase, once you have all these stakeholders together, it opens up interesting possibilities, because you're then able to not only leverage budgets across departments within a city, but you're also able to leverage public-private partnerships, regional, state, federal, and other revenue avenues to help fund and offset the cost of some of these Smart Cities initiatives. On the design phase, obviously, it's what we've alluded to earlier in terms of how you technically design a smart city. It's also important to know that a smart city is a system of systems, and so it's a little bit more complex architecture. The thing I'll note here, going back to our holistic approach, though, is that whenever you have a smart cities initiative planned, it's very important to make sure that that initiative is integrated into the city's master plan, so that when departments go about procurement in the future, they can look back on this and understand how they're affecting the broader plans of the smart city. Installation is very important. As we mentioned, smart cities projects are complex and usually go across departmental layers. Many departments are used to procuring on their departmental level, obviously, and integrators are usually specialized in areas pertinent to that department. When you look at a smart cities implementation, because it's implemented across multiple departments in the public and private domain often, there's a broader level of expertise that's required to be successful, and so that's very important. And finally, as Steve alluded to earlier, sustainment and monitoring. It's critically important that you market your initiatives and you train them so that the public and your employees are able to leverage and actually use the value and the investments that you're creating on their behalf. So let's dive into each one of these three phases for a moment. And what we're going to do is, it's always, I think, helpful to have a contextual approach when talking about this so that it's not all theory. And so, as Stephen mentioned, what we're going to do today is talk about intelligent integration in the context of one of the smart cities initiatives we're seeing a lot today, and that's transit communication systems and the master plans associated with it. So going back to our four phases of a smart cities project, the first, as we mentioned before, always starts with the vision. And when you're looking at transit systems of the future, or smart cities transit systems, this is what the vision typically looks like. And what this is the intersection of 2020. And you'll notice that from a physical standpoint, the intersection looks very much the same as always. Roads haven't been widened because obviously that's not something that can typically be done within a city. But what's happened is the intersection has gotten smarter, and this is where you begin to see that convergence of the physical and the digital. If you look there on the top right as an example, in this vision, all of the stoplights and other assets in the intersection have been adapted using digital software and cloud-based technology so that they're now more efficient. So, you know, we've all had that case as an example where you're waiting at a red light in an intersection and you're the only one there. With adaptive traffic control, that no longer happens. And simply by implementing this, some of our folks are finding that you're gaining 20 and 30% efficiencies in congestion and flow merely by overlaying this technology on infrastructure that's already there today. Vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to infrastructure technology, obviously, is a big initiative, and here in California at least, that's something that many folks are moving to by 2020. This will enable things like vehicle priority so that buses, emergency vehicles can travel more efficiently in congested time periods, as well as open up new commerce paths with tolling and fines and things of that nature to help offset the cost of this infrastructure. And that's a little bit of the digital and what smart integration or intelligent integration provides. When we talk about that connected community, you know, what does this vision do for the public and for for employees. And here we have on the top left an example of a public-facing traffic application to help citizens make more informed choices on what mode of transportation will help me get to a location the fastest, whether it be bus, bike, rideshare, car, which one is most environmentally friendly. Those types of things can be enabled once you extract this data and provide it in a useful way to citizens. And again, on the government-facing side as well, you can imagine down there at the bottom right, assets and applications as well that can be done. So that's the vision. Let's talk a little bit about those smart cities challenges and how this relates specifically to the transit domain. Here again, we have a large territorially widely distributed traffic assets, as we've already alluded to, and connecting and securing those legacy assets, especially the investments that every city has been making over the last 40 years, and making sure that those integrate with next generation systems is a critical challenge. And finally, how do I provide citizens and the city itself with meaningful applications with these tools? We alluded to this life cycle approach, which is feasibility and making sure that shareholders get brought in when you're looking at a traffic system master plan. Financing is very interesting because as you engage other departments outside of the transit department, you again have new revenue paths. There's a lot of regional and state and federal level financing actually to help with the environment, and often that can be leveraged as a key example here, but there are many more as well. In the design we mentioned before, traffic system master plans need to be integrated into the broader city's master plan so that these can be carried out across the many different departments involved. In installation, it's important again that even though this is a transit department initiative primarily, there are other departments, other technologies involved, and having that smart systems integrator is critical to the success of these types of projects, as we've seen. And finally, the final and last phase of this life cycle approach, which is very important in making sure that these traffic system master plans are successful, is this idea of sustainment and monitoring, and making sure that the public is aware of the investments you're making on their behalf. We had one client mentioned that they had made a $2 million investment in this smart traffic initiative, and then got complaint calls the following week about a problem they had just fixed because it hadn't been marketed out there to the public. So this is very important. And as we dive down into each of these three intelligent integration phases here, specifically for traffic communications, this will illustrate a little bit more what I was talking about earlier in terms of how you actually implement intelligent integration into a specific activity. So when you look at that first step, which is connecting your assets and securing and bringing back that data, there's really three steps that are very important here. And the first is to create a field asset upgrade roadmap, because as we had talked before, the city has already made many investments in infrastructure across different departments and over a very long time period. And really this is where you want to start. The key to any Smart Cities project is to leverage as much of the previous investment that a city's made and rather augment that rather than ripping and replacing and starting from scratch, because really that's the only way that you can effectively implement a lot of these programs on a fixed budget. So when we talk about a field asset upgrade roadmap, what we're talking about is identifying what assets are available today, identifying the requirements across those assets today and tomorrow in the future, and then identifying that roadmap for addressing those requirements, as well as how do I secure this network for the future. The second phase is creating a communications system master plan, and this goes hand in hand with the field asset master plan. Once you know how you're going to upgrade your assets, you have a similar plan to how you're going to upgrade your communications, and then all that together, it forms the basis of your communications master plan. And to give you an example of what this looks like in the real world, this is a very common case that we see with the folks that we work with. So in this particular scenario, what I just highlighted was, you see in the red there, typically a traffic department will have their own fiber optic cable along main corridors that they've put in the ground. They'll lease third-party lines for some suburban areas, typically from the local telco. And then as an example of how multiple departments come to play in these initiatives, the utility will often have wireless LAN coverage or other assets that can be leveraged. And so again, what you want to do when you're building these communication system upgrade plans is to leverage those all together and figure out how can I bring assets across departments together for shared use so that the investments that have been made previously can be augmented and serve the needs of the city moving forward. Going to the second phase of intelligent integration, we talk about once you have that data in-house, how can you interpret and analyze that data and create a common data set to share across the city. And what's really important here is it's not about centralization. It's not about centralizing all of the city's departmental systems into a centralized location. What it's about is interfacing with them and then creating a common location that data can be accessed. And so typically what we recommend is creating an interface layer with every department where that data that's housed at the department is copied and centrally located and then cleaned and curated so that it can be accessed across departments. And the two key steps here, the first one is to have a smart cities enterprise service bus. And what that is that's a very long term for you need to have a way to be able to read the proprietary information in a lot of these departmental systems and then create a normalized and common set of data that can be used across the city. And so the ESB is what reads the different protocols, and data fusion is then what normalizes, deduplicates, and readies that data for use by other departments. And finally, the second step is how do I once I have that data and it's ready for use, how do I analyze and create useful applications with that data? And here, it's most important to start with the questions and problems and opportunities that can be addressed. And then once you have that curated data, there are many analytics packages that you can bring to bear to provide solutions. And so again, going back to our systems level architecture, this is again what that analytics portion of the system stack looks like, just so you can see that in the context of what we just shared. Moving on to the third phase of intelligent integration, this is really where the value is created. And this is once I've extracted that data, once I've created useful applications, how do I get that out there? How do I present it to the public and to employees and enable that collaboration and that two-way conversation that really drives the value and really creates that connected community? And first we talked about the way that this data is presented. And it's very important that data be mobile friendly. This is something we'll talk about in a moment, but mobile is where the industry is going, and you really want to be able to impact people's lives and help them be more productive in real time wherever they are. Mobile is a critical component of that. And finally, again, the launch and delivery and marketing are keys to a successful project and successful engagement with the community, because if they don't know about your initiative, they don't know how to take advantage of it in a very simple way, it's not going to be a success. Now, we talked about mobile, and what I wanted to do here was give you an example of how a mobile application can help foster a connected community. As we mentioned before, there was a milestone reached recently where more than 50% of the searches made on Google were done through a mobile device, and that's a huge milestone if you think about that and the direction that technology is going. The mobile device is really becoming our primary interface with between the physical and digital world, and so it's all about creating leveraging this device to create a two-way conversation with the public, because again what this does is it enables the presentation of real-time information to help them wherever they may be. And the same thing goes for city employees as well in terms of making them more productive. It's very important that you're able to move across screens and help people wherever they may be. And so how does a mobile application create that connected community, that two-way conversation let's look at how an example of how this is done in the transit domain. So you imagine, riding a bus, a very simple task day, and typically this is what most bus stops look like. It'll have the buses, and there'll typically be a large printed timetable of when buses are supposed to arrive. Now imagine, again, that blending of the physical and the digital world together via your mobile device, and this is an example of what can be achieved and what can be done. Imagine holding your, imagine opening up your Smart Cities application and holding your phone up to the bus stop. Now, this is a technology called augmented reality, where digital information is overlaid on top of your physical world to provide you real-time access to information. And so here, if you look on the phone, just below the bus stop sign, there is a button that says timetable. And what the phone is doing is it's noting the location of where it's at, and then drawing down real-time information from that intelligent infrastructure to tell you exactly where the bus is and exactly what the ETA is for different buses. Additionally, as the cities become more and more diverse, there's always the issue of language as another example. So you can't print every bus stop in every different language, obviously, for many reasons. But again, by leveraging the digital, you can overlay a language button here just above the bus stop sign, and then citizens can access that information in whatever language is easiest for them to comprehend. So this is an example of how, by pulling information from that intelligent infrastructure and presenting, blending that physical and digital together and presenting it via a Smart Cities application, you can help create that connected community and help make people's days more efficient. But also as important is that two-way conversation that we talked about. And so this is another example of similarly how the same mobile app can create that conversation and actually help the city itself operate more efficiently. So imagine while you're at that bus stop, you notice that there's a problem with the fire hydrant next door. It could just as easily be a pothole, a problem with the bus bench. Now, as many people know, cities spend a lot of money on asset maintenance throughout the year, and typically that involves either once or twice a year a city employee visiting every single asset to note its condition. And so what you're able to do by leveraging a Smart Cities application is create that two-way conversation, where, as you can imagine, a citizen standing at a bus stop and notes that the fire hydrant next to the bus stop has a problem, needs to be repaired. They can use that same Smart Cities application to take a picture of the fire hydrant. Again, the phone notes the location, and then they can send a comment of what needs to be repaired. And this message can then be automatically integrated into the workflow for the city, so that someone can be dispatched to take care of the problem. And if you can imagine on the city side the efficiency that this creates, not only does the city not have to send out its employees to assess the condition of assets as often, but they also instantaneously have a prioritized list that the citizens themselves are crowdsourcing, so that they can visit obviously the things you want to fix first are the things people are noticing, and so this really enables that by the citizens being able to self-report issues that they notice. And so that's an example of that connected community that you can create in that whole process, where you start with a vision, you leverage the physical through intelligent infrastructure, connect that to the digital with intelligent integration, and then use a Smart Cities application as an example here to create that connected community. So we mentioned that we'd talk about some of the top Smart Cities applications that we are seeing cities embark upon today. This is a list we have, and this is by no means a comprehensive list, but these are some of the things that cities are looking at implementing today, and technologies that are ready to go today, if you will. Smart Grid 2.0 and distribution level smart grid across water, gas, and electric utilities. Intelligent transit systems we talked about. Mobile tourism and city branding is another big one, as competition in this area across cities becomes more intense. This is another initiative that many cities are embarking upon. Smart airports, smart seaports, and creating ways for ports and airports to generate revenue outside of traditional methods. We mentioned advanced water and gas infrastructure for utilities. Cloud-based infrastructure, cloud-based administration, is another big one. If you think about one of the main roles of a city is administering different things throughout a city, and that could be permitting and licensing and so forth. When you take that to the cloud, there are many efficiencies on both sides, on the public and the government side, that can be gained there. Smart parking is another great one where this is one of the highest net revenue generating initiatives that can be done. And when you do smart parking in conjunction with other smart cities initiatives, it can help offset the cost of these. Intelligent public safety systems, this has been something going on for a while. As we mentioned before, a key component of all of these really is privacy, cyber, and physical security. And finally, civic engagement. Steve alluded to this with some new technologies like wearables, mobile devices, et cetera, that are coming out to help you really reach out to the public and create that connected community and that two-way conversation. So 3 key takeaways to sum all this up and how to begin your own Smart Cities initiative. The first is, again, start with that life cycle approach and ensure the needs of all stakeholders are being properly integrated. Second is utilize a smart city systems architecture because, as we discussed, a smart city is a system of smaller departmental systems and needs to be designed accordingly. And finally, take an intelligent integration approach to projects. Augment the previous investments that a city has already made by bringing the physical and digital together to have the most effective and most valuable system. Now, if you need help getting started with all of this, Leidos has been a trusted advisor and is to municipalities across the globe. And we specialize in all of these different phases, whether it be the diligence phase to understand and assess where there may be some opportunities for smart cities projects, as well as scoping, designing solutions, and delivering on all scales. So with that, I will turn it back, and I think we're going to go into a Q&A round for folks that have any questions.
All right. Thank you, Brandon, and thanks, Steve. That was a very interesting presentation about smart cities. It is now time to move on to the question and answer portion of today's presentation, as Brandon mentioned. So I know we have several questions that have already come in. However, those of you out in the audience, if you haven't already done so, please go ahead and enter your questions right now. Just click on the Q&A widget and type your question in. We're going to respond to as many questions as time allows. And now I'm going to hand the program back over to Steve Schneider. He is going to moderate the questions today. So, Steve, I'll hand it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Teresa. We have just a very large amount of very insightful questions, so we'll get to it. Brandon and I will be rotating back and forth answering these questions, and we'll chime in and over each other's questions. So the first question is, do you see paybacks from this work in smaller cities, say of around 50,000 citizens? And how can a turnkey product be provided by an outside firm that overcomes the potential lack of expertise that may exist within the city? So absolutely, we do see paybacks from this in cities of 50,000. In fact, Lidos is working with a municipal up in the Northeast in which we are looking about leveraging multiple energy systems, electricity together with thermal, along with using real-time data coming off of the electrical market pricing system to be able to actually lower electrical cost and working with key accounts and industrials within that city. So absolutely, the payoffs. Also, as more systems come together, for example, waste can be used as an energy asset. Your generators can be used to produce electrical and thermal realms. Going in and getting the more assets that you actually can tie into the system, the greater the potential economic synergies and paybacks do come out. And with regards to turnkey being provided by the potential lack of expertise, each city has its own strengths and weaknesses associated with expertise. A turnkey product can be provided, particularly if you look around and can work with the city stakeholders of what's a potential way to be able to do some funding and working with the regulatory constraints. So absolutely, the turnkey project can be done. That will potentially unique for each city, but based upon those considerations, those 6 architectures, it certainly can be done. Second question is, you mentioned different financing vehicles outside of city budgets to fund smart city projects. Can you give us some examples of what they may be? So I'll take my first stab at that, then roll it over to Brandon. There's a couple ways that can be done. One is that there is a public-private partnership arena in which you can often go out and get third-party money from Wall Street financial firms to be able to set up and own assets, and then essentially have that third party either work with a shared savings perspective or a power purchase agreement. And you can structure that so that model can potentially be either on balance sheet or off balance sheet. So shared savings, PowerPoint agreements, lease backs. You can even do a situation where it makes sense to, many situations it certainly makes sense to work with the utilities. So you may also be able to work with that there's a combined public-private partnership along with having some of the infrastructure go within a regulated, feedback from the utilities. So certainly there are multiple ways you can do that. That's one of the beautiful things as Wall Street starts waking up and realizing that there's a lot of energy and a lot of synergies put into this. There are going to be financial options to be able to go out and do P3s and that type of situation. It's actually a very exciting realm with regards to going in and being able to really use private industry to be able to go help out and move the smart cities potentially away from a traditional city-based funding situation. Pretty exciting. For cities that don't manage their utilities, what do you see as the integration of possibilities with the utilities, both from a technical, architectural standpoint and an informational standpoint, such as outages and planned work? So, Brandon, I'll kick that one over to you. I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Could you do that one more time, Steve? I
sure.
wanted to hear that whole question again.
No problem. Yeah, for cities that do not manage their utilities, what do you see as the integration possibilities with both the technical architecture and an informational standpoint?
Yeah, there's actually a couple that come to mind, and again, well, I'll tell you a few things, and again, utilities themselves, especially when you look at an investor-owned utility outside of the city, many of them are at different stages of this smart cities solution game. But I'll tell you a couple of things that we've seen that are interesting to kind of highlight the possibilities. The first one that a lot of cities are doing is this concept of working with the utilities on intelligent street lighting. This is one of the biggest cost savers that either the city, if they own this infrastructure and pay the utility, which is often the case, or even if the utility themselves owns and operates it all, that there are opportunities here for them both to work together, and this can be some of the simple advantages are obviously when you take a standard street light and you retrofit it with an LED bulb first, but then you connect it again to the digital to make it an intelligent system. There are additional cost savings that can be driven from there. So that's an easy one to help both parties save money overall. But then you also look at the opportunities. Once you can control streetlights, that becomes a very valuable asset across different departments. So we see in the public safety domain, we see police officers, as an example, when they're responding to an incident where there's a intelligently integrated streetlight system, a patrol car can pull up to a scene. The officer can actually raise the luminosity of the lights in the area and light up the entire area so they can assess the scene before going in to respond. Similarly, for events, if you can imagine, large-scale events within a city, you can alter the lighting to help with traffic flow. And in emergency situations, you can do things like run lights down traffic corridors to signal the evacuation paths in cities. So there are all kinds of interesting things with that single application that can be done. That's one example. Another very quick example is we'll also see, again, on that network side, both utilities and cities sharing their network infrastructure, sharing their excess bandwidth together to help offset some of those operational costs. So I think those are two examples, and there's many more as well, but I'll throw it back to you, Steve.
Great, thanks. The next question, I would think that a smart city blueprint can ease the transition to much-needed regionalized or shared municipal services for economic efficiencies. Thoughts? I can't agree with that more. And in reality, if you take a step back, that smart city blueprint is directly related to that crystalline vision that actually starts the smart city solution process for your particular city or community. An example of that, over the last year or so, Lidos has worked with a city with regards to helping engineer the solution for creating an industrial business park from the ground up that looked at combining waste, community waste, industrial waste, landfill gas, transportation, utility electrical supply, combined heat and power, all under the realm of going in and saying, I'd like to have 20% or greater less expensive total energy provided, be sustainable, and do it in a scalable and modular fashion. That blueprint truly crystallized and drove what the solution would be driving out for that smart industrial park being put together. So absolutely, having a smart city blueprint eases that transition. And then by taking a step back and framing that in the technical and the economic and the regulatory arena, that's where you get a lot of those economic efficiencies out of it. The bottom end of that is the mayor was looking for, can I have an economic development draw to bring new clients and existing clients into the city and improve the quality of life? Absolutely. So that is almost a prerequisite for having that smart city blueprint. That was a great question. Excuse me. So the next question, and Brandon, I'll direct this to you. What is the wireless spectrum typically being used by the cities, since this can be a large underlying operational expense?
Yeah, that's a great technical question, and we actually see this all the time. And the answer is there's not one answer. I think it's different for every city, and it really starts with what investments have already made. Many cities, and especially when you get to the larger metropolitan areas, have secured their own spectrum, and of course, when that investment's already made, that's the place you want to start. When you look at a city who hasn't already gone down that path and it's kind of an open playing field, we're seeing two things. We're seeing the first, there are many excellent technologies that operate now in free and open spectrum, and that's typically that 2.4 gigahertz spectrum that we're talking about. And even though you have Wi-Fi operating on this and Bluetooth and many other different communication streams flowing on this channel, the technology today is at a point where you can still have a very robust communications link in this space, and again, it's very cost efficient. We see this not only with cities but with other critical infrastructure industries, utilities, public safety as well. So that's a great place to start, that 2.4 gigahertz. The second one we see a lot is, again, where this public and private relationship comes into play, and that's for wireless. Many cities are leveraging cellular assets with one of the cellular providers in their area, just because you eliminate that capex, that upfront capex cost, and really those rates are coming down to a point where in certain cases that's affordable as well. So it depends on a couple things. If you've made an investment, then go down that route. If you haven't, open spectrum is fantastic, as well as leveraging investments either by other departments, other cities, or the commercial environment as well.
Great, thank you, Brandon. Great insight. In regards to utilities, and I'll even go beyond that, let's say the entire city infrastructure, how can smart city technology affect the processes of determining whether assets need to be repaired or replaced? So I'll take a first stab at that, then Brandon, I'll throw it over to you. So I'll do a roads example, then go to a utility example. A great way of doing that is roads have a definitive lifespan. And the more and heavier traffic that goes across those roads, the macadam and the various infrastructure underneath of it degrade either more quickly or more slowly. So an example of having sensors around your transportation so that you can look at not only the volume but perhaps maybe even the weight that goes along can then help you look at a predictive and a proactive manner of saying, does this road actually need to be repaved or repaired, or does it need to be done sooner, does it need to be done later? And deferring it to latter is not necessarily a bad thing because you're using your resources effectively. An example in the electrical distribution system would be as you look at how transformers have a definitive lifespan to them. And typically on the utilities, when you can overheat a transformer temporarily to carry excess load. And one of the beautiful things now that's happening with all the sensors is there's tremendous amounts of big data that are coming in from all different sources. So for one of those examples is you can actually look at your loads and your fluctuations and determine, is my transformer, does it need to be repaired earlier or later, and how do I look into my overall life cycle of that? The broader perspective of that, and this is really where it gets exciting, is with so much big data that is out there, there is correlations and there are causations that we don't know exist yet. So one of the art forms that goes with that is how do I take my big data, how do I ingest it in real time, and then how do I look at that data and say, hey, this is telling me something I didn't know, and potentially being able to tie that in and have a greater operational efficiency or asset lifespan control out of your utility. That's really where the smart city is moving to, is how do I take that tidal wave worth of digital data and make it actionable so that it does what that question's asking for. How can I help that with my asset management? Brandon, I don't know if you want to put any extra perspective on that.
The only thing I think I'll add to that, Steve, is just to reemphasize your point there, which is once you've intelligently integrated that data and brought it back and curated it, really the sky then becomes the limit. And the challenge there is to expand your horizons, even if you will, right? So that's again where it comes, where the first thing to do is look at what challenges could I potentially solve. Where are there efficiencies to be had? And even if you don't know how to get there, once you have that question in mind, you can attack it with the data. And typically, when you have the right folks, when you have some good data scientists or a good partner, you can find an answer. And you'd be surprised the level of complexity. You gave some great examples there, Steve, but you'd be surprised that most challenges can be addressed in a very interesting way when you attack it with big data. And it's just a matter of again, defining it and then having the right people to go chase it.
Yeah, and absolutely, and that's really where, again, that physical and digital realms really merge to be able to drive the city into a much more efficient category. Time for two more questions. The one I have with regards to this is, hey, what is the first step of getting going with the Smart Cities project? You mentioned getting stakeholders together, but what typically comes next? And I'll take a quick stab at that and then throw it over to Brandon also for his perspective. Absolutely the first thing, of course, is getting your vision down, how you want your city to move. And then getting the stakeholders together allows that to crystallize and come together so that in a call it a change management perspective or a key stakeholder issue, you're moving forward from that point. What comes next after that? Well, depending upon each individual city, typically what can happen is the city would then potentially go out and reach out and contact either a large system integrator or a firm that has, I guess, the thought process around how do you tie large systems together to be able to go toward a large goal. Because as Brandon had showed in the presentation, the ribbon chart, there was like a feasibility. There was how do I pay for it? How do I build it? How do I maintain it? It had those questions behind there. Those questions are really the next step of what you do toward crafting your solution. You want to be able to sit there and look at your entire life cycle at an early point and answer those key critical questions, so that helps then refine what your vision is. and then drive your resources toward moving forward. Brandon, I don't know if you want to throw any extra perspective on that.
No, I think that's great, Steve. And I just point you back to that life cycle approach again, where once you have the stakeholders, it's like you say, bring everyone together, define that vision, and then assess how to go about the program. And I think what you highlighted there is it's great to have. You need to have someone that can provide that facilitation and that project management across the various stakeholders. Obviously, this is something that we do a lot of, but it's important that you have someone serving that role so that you can, and that has an overview of what the overall approach is going to look like to make sure that it's successful.
Great. Time for one last question, and this is a question I'm sure that's on a lot of people's minds. Hey, cybersecurity concerns our city. Can you discuss how you approach cybersecurity in your solution? And Brandon, I'm going to let you take that one away.
Yeah, I would take it one level further to say that it's not just about cybersecurity. It's the cyber, it's the physical, it's privacy. I call it something like total. It's a comprehensive security approach that encompasses all those. And really, if you go back to that system level architecture, that technical description of what a smart city system looks like, all cyber and physical and privacy need to be incorporated into every layer of that system. So the devices in the field themselves need to be secure, and there's many examples I can give you of, especially when you look at legacy assets that were out there, been out there for 30 years where that wasn't an issue. It's how do I go in and secure those assets first, and then there's a very methodical approach you take on security where you start there and then you secure every layer of that system all the way out to the customer so that the system as a whole is protected, and that's kind of that weakest link concept again. So there's a methodology to go into that. I don't think we have enough time to dive into it, but it's really that's the approach you take. It's cyber and physical, every layer of the system.
Great. Sounds great. So that is pretty much it with regards to the questions. Teresa, I'm going to turn it back over to you to close out. Again, on behalf of Lidos Engineering and Brandon and Steve, thank you for attending. Teresa?
Thanks. And on behalf of Power Grid International and Electric Light and Power magazines, as well as Penwell, I want to thank both of our presenters today, Brandon Freeman and Steve Schneider. It was a great presentation. I also want to thank Lidos Engineering for sponsoring today's presentation, Connecting the Physical and Digital Domains, Intelligent Integration for a Smart City. As I mentioned earlier, the presentation will be archived within 24 hours, and you can access it from the homepage at www.elp.com. In addition, you'll receive an email message that will remind you about the archive. It will contain a link to the archive webcast. So feel free to share the link with your coworkers and peers who maybe did not get to sit in on today's presentation. I want to thank all of you in our audience for joining us today. I know that you're all busy, and we really appreciate you making time for this presentation. I look forward to sharing future webcasts with you. I'm Teresa Hansen for Power Grid International and Electric Light and Power magazines. Have a great day, everyone.